Good morning, Boker Tov, happy sun if you're in sunny places, happy snow if you're in other places. It's always great to be here. And I'm always challenged by being here. Because I'm sorry. I am Cheryl Gordon, and I hate it when people don't introduce themselves, even though most of you do know who I am. And I'm a community Jewish educator in my reinvented after retirement kind of life. I was actually a Jewish professional in my professional life as well. When I am invited to this group, there's always a challenge because I've got before me lifelong learners who've heard it before. And according to Judaism, it's absolutely appropriate for you to hear it again. Okay. But for me, as a teacher, having taught Yitro, Parshat Yitro, which is on page in Eitz Chaim.
432, chapter 18, verse 1.
Okay, and we're in Shmos. Okay.
I thought that would be
okay. Exodus. Okay. For me, I'm thinking I actually do love this parsha. And I used to be for a long time, there's a large congregation in Houston, Texas called Beth Yeshurun. And believe me, changing the name to B'nai Yeshurun took me 5 years. Now I'm because I worked at Beth Yeshurun. So I was the principal of the rather large supplementary high school program, and our retreat, our Shabbaton every year frequently fell on Parshat Yitro. So I have many, many memories of teenagers struggling with this and making fun of it and ignoring it, but also learning from it. So anyway, I digress a bit. So I thought, here we go again. I need to find something new, but before we go to the new, I think we have to do the obligatory little summary and the repeat. So here we start with the test. If I say this is the parsha about Yitro, is anybody willing to shout out something that happens in this parsha?
Commandments.
The 10 Commandments, okay. The 10 Commandments, which are the Aseret Dibrot, okay? Anything else?
Judges.
That's okay. Explain that a bit more, what you mean by that, another sentence?
Yeah, the communal distribution of judgment.
Exactly. Okay, and whose idea was that? Yitro, okay. So this is a chapter where we have management consultant appear for the first time. And that's super important as well. This advice is, as someone who owned a business for many years, was invaluable. I can't say that I got it from Yitro, but delegation is really important. Smart thing for us all to listen to. Yitro as a character, was he Jewish?
No.
Nope.
Okay, yes.
He became Jewish. He followed Moses.
Wow.
Because he tried he tried out a lot of the religion, and having seen what our God did to
Perfect.
For the people, he
signed on, exactly. He was in awe of the things that Moshe shared about what had happened in terms of the miracles in Egypt, and also the parting of the sea. And he signed out.
Well, from what we told or taught that when Moshe first came to Yitro, he understood that he didn't worship the same God, and that was before we went all back and before all the plagues and before all of that. So there was supposedly, I think in the Torah, or at least the interpretation was that he was of the one God that we were, just not in practicing it in the same way. Is that wrong or right?
I don't think there's any wrong or right. One of the things that I have to admit is that I went in my search to find something new to teach to you guys today. I went crazy reading commentaries, and I'm confuser than I've ever been. Because everybody's got it. I mean, that's basically what it is. So even on something else we're gonna go through later, I'm just trying to find sources, and people are quoting sources that are inconsistent with each other. So we're just gonna have to buy onto a big picture and then what's comfortable for us. And in Judaism, it's very important to remember that you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. That guy doesn't have to be wrong for me to be right. So there's often more than one answer. It isn't that easy. But that's great, that, what you say are right. So, as I say, I have taught this before, and I wanted to mention that, 2 times ago or so here, I gave a handout about the 10 Commandments that people think we all share. This is something that the Christians and we share. And I had a handout that shows the differences between, there are different versions of the 10 Commandments. They are in fact not the same. There are some similarities, but you'd be surprised at the differences, not only the numbering, but also the content. For example, thou shalt have no gods before me. In terms of Catholicism, the idea of iconic God is very real. So those kind of things. And I just want to tell you, I don't exactly know what happened, but I did send as an optional, I think it may have gone out to the people who are online, but I did request printing of 2 documents, and I don't see that either of them are here.
Oh,
Um,
there might be in the office.
Okay, well, let's not jump right now, but I think we're gonna manage fine without them, but if you, let me think on that for a second, just in terms of disrupting. But that one about the differences of the 10 Commandments was totally optional because I've been there, done that, and some of you guys maybe have in the past. I thought maybe some of you didn't.
It's the link for the source material for the.
Only the 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments.
Yeah, and the other one didn't make
John's
it.
getting it.
Okay, here. Okay, we're not gonna use it, so it's just totally, no, it's the other one we're gonna use, which I don't think got copied.
This is the one that was publicized.
Right. Something, I don't know, we had little technical difficulties, no big deal. I've been teaching for so many years, we can get by it, but let's go forward. So on the 10 Commandments, I just wanted to ask you something sort of in a gut. Please don't go study it because we don't need to, but more or less, are there more positive commandments or negative commandments in those? Or negative commandments. Do you know how many times the word no or negative, how many negatives there are? Actually, they're supposedly, according to sources. Okay. In those, Sarah DeBro, no, okay, but about 13 times there's a no. And one of the teachings that I did want to share with you before we move on is the concept that being told no isn't a bad thing. The contrary, the opposite of that is having no boundaries, no rules, laissez-faire. And basically what that means is having a life of no substance.
Yeah.
And so no isn't always a bad thing. No can be a good thing. And we as Jews have things that we're absolutely commanded to do positively. But those no's, if we examine them and we observe them appropriately, are giving us some substance that some people perhaps who live a more free reign life don't have. So in previous times, excuse me, I'm just going to, I'm already digressing from my notes, but I said, okay, so I talked about the Big Ten with me and the differences between religions. And as I said, if you want this handout or you have it on, if you want to look at it just for your own interest, edification, that's up to you. The other thing I focused on last year was about Yitro as a convert and took a leap in terms of what Judaism talks about in terms of conversions and such. Some of you were here, some of you may remember that. But now, so let's move to today. So I took a deep dive, read lots of commentaries, I said, trying to find something new. And a lot of those commentaries, no surprise, were on the 10 Commandments. So actually, it was right before my eyes. There it was. And I found something that really spoke to me, and I hope it's going to speak to you. So I think it's fair to say that the 10 Commandments, the Aseret Dibrot, are the cornerstone or the beginning of our ethical system. But for many of us, that's what they are, dibrot. They're utterances. Okay, they're not, and then we have 613, give or take, other ones that are commandments and they're there. But we don't necessarily own them, and frankly, it takes quite a bit of work today to own them. I believe that Torah is a guide to life, and I teach that very often. I often liken it, believe it or not, to a how-to manual that you get with a new appliance. But what's going to happen today is that I'm going to take a deep dive, and I hope you believe a proper deeper dive into those commandments in terms of putting them in real life. Okay, in a way that speaks to me and hopefully that speaks to you as well. And in order to do that, we're going to look at Musar. And Musar is the Jewish practice for self-improvement. And in my mind, the Torah gives us a guide for living, but Musar gives us the practices on how to live a Torah credentialed life, so to speak. So I'm suspecting that many of you have at least heard the word or been exposed to it at some level, but none of you have heard of Musar according to Cheryl. So you are going to, and I really, really believe, myself as a lifelong learner as well, that we always find something new in repetition. And if any of you are anybody here a regular Musar practicer? Anybody here an expert? Anybody took a course at the Musar Institute? I'm not trying to put you down. I'm just trying to edify myself that I'm in this room. There's a Spanish expression in the land of in the land of the blind, he with one eye is king. Well, I got at least one eye on this particular topic. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about, from some of my old notes, just a basic introduction about what the heck we're talking about. Okay, so where to start?
At the very beginning, there's a song like that.
Sing it for us, right?
Okay, so the word Musar, the original appearance of that word in our canon is in the book of Proverbs, and it means a conduct, moral conduct, not immoral conduct. So the word does appear, but it's been evolving for a very long time into something more concrete, more formalized as it is in today's form. So what it comes to is the response for people's need to have sources of wisdom to help them deal with inner uncertainties that result from the lives that we live in, and also to find a personal moral anchor. Yes, we say we're anchored to Torah, but if we're honest with ourselves, that word in itself is kind of doesn't have an embodiment, a concretization, a practice, a real life.
Yeah.
We need help in what that means and how do we practice? Not what it is, but how do we practice it? So even people who don't necessarily see themselves as spiritual find value in this guidance. I'm gonna be smoother in a sec. I kept too many notes to tell you. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. Okay, so practicing Musar can lead to the deepening of spiritual wisdom and a strengthening of our connection to our Jewish heritage. The movement, as a concrete movement, began in the mid-1800s and was attributed to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Does that name sound familiar to you, Salanter? And does anyone know what country? I have roots there, maybe some of you too. It's Lithuania. Okay. But he didn't create the super body of text, the book, the go-to. What he did is he looked around at the last 1,000+ years of Musar documents that have existed. Basically, and we have documents that date from about the year 1000 with a common era. And he incorporated all of these. Now, the names of authors, names like Sadia Gaon, Shlomo Ibn Gabriel, Moshe Chaim Lusato, Ibn Pekuta, those names are all sources, even the Rambam are sources of things. You don't have to worry about those names, but you might notice that a lot of them are basically Sephardic type origins, which makes sense in terms of the culture at that time. So anyway, he sort of took these practices and made that are old and ancient and kind of combined them together or collected them together. And basically it became a thing for people to learn these particular texts. Now, what Musar isn't is a fierce, strict discipline that you sit and you intellectually analyze all of these things that's around. It's really a loving guide to live a better life. it's, the rabbis go out of their way to make sure that you understand that, at least in their minds, it's not another self-improvement course. That's not what it is. The main difference is that self-improvement is usually directed to getting what you want, whereas Musar is learning how to be with what God wants you to be. So there is some language, just a few terms that are Musar related. The first one is that they talk about inner traits. And that word, does anyone have that word? Amidah, I know you've heard it. Amidah, or the plural is midot. We have inner traits, each one of us, that need balancing, okay? And we need to struggle to become personally more whole. But the bigger picture is another Musar term, which is by us becoming more whole, the world finds wholeness, completeness. And the Musar term is shlemut, from the word shalom, okay, related to the word shalom. So now we've got two vocabulary words, well, three, if we want to count Musar, which is a code of conduct, and if we want to count midot, which are these inner traits. And number three is shlemut, which is totally fine to have, and we should have. Peace and wholeness for the whole world begins with each one of us as individuals. But in terms of what the movement is we're doing this with the intent of fixing the world, not just for ourselves, not just for our own sake. So basically, our job assignment is to make the world a better place. So if you're habitually impatient, then developing patience will not only make you a better person, improve your life, but it's your assignment, or the result is to make the world a more patient world. So what material do you use for this? We're going to look at a text, and that's just kind of a send-off, an introduction to get the feel, get the vibe. But the material that we use for this is human life, our lives. And each one of you, if you start practicing a little bit of Musar, you're going to be using your own material. You're going to be creating your own material. You don't have to write a book. Don't panic. That is not at all what this is about. But stay tuned. I'm building up the mystery, because I will reveal this in a little bit. The comment from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lusato. The one stone on which the entire building rests, meaning the world, is the concept that God wants each person to complete himself, body, and soul. His work that is quoted in Musar, if you've ever heard it, is, I believe it's, maybe it's not Mesilat Yesharim in Hebrew. I don't know. The translations are very loose. Here is the path of the just. 1740 was the year he did that. Okay. So let me, one more word. Okay, got one more, and then we'll go into the text. The other vocab word you've all heard, but in the Musar context, and that is, so again, I know I'm harping at this, but we got the word Musar, we got the word midot, and we've got the word shlemut. Now we're going to add to it cheshbon. And we all know, thinking, our heads go right away to Elul, and to cheshbon hanefesh. Okay, fine. But this is a Musar everyday kind of thing, an evaluation kind of thing. It's the, am I good enough? And the list I want to give you of some of the midot, they're not all of them, but these are the ones that are commonly discussed in Musar. And they're listed as opposites. Interestingly enough, one of the early ones is patience versus impatience. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to come public, but in your own head, maybe you relate. Okay. Generosity versus stinginess. Gratitude versus ingratitude. Okay. Trust versus worry. In other words, having confidence versus being stressed about everything. Being respectful versus being judgmental. Being enthusiastic with energy or being lazy. there are absolutely other ones that, because like arrogance is important versus humility. We can add, and this can go on and on. I just wanted to get you thinking a little bit about what this is all about in a little bit more concrete way. So, we'll go into a how-to later, but I want to, and this is something that I had sent, but I don't think, and this is the one I would want you to have, but you're gonna have to bear with me and maybe we can fix it later. I want to read to you, it's not terribly long, it'll probably take us 10 minutes, but I think it's worth it. It's at least important for me that you are exposed to it. An introduction to one of the seminal texts in terms of Musar. The Hebrew is Orchot Tzedakim, the ways of the righteous. And it was composed somewhere in the 1400s, somewhere in the what is today Germany type area. Why am I dodging? Because nobody knows who. I found lots of things that it is thought to be written by, but it's not the same thought to. There are many different theories of who it was, which is kind of interesting because that's actually not that long ago in terms of having accurate sources, but that's the way it is. Okay, so we're, okay, I had forgotten this. The original name for Orchat, the newer name from Rabbi Salanter is Orchat Tzadikim. The original name of this was Sefer Hamidot. And there it goes back to the word that we've learned already, the book of character traits. And okay, so this work advocates balancing our character, exercising balance in our life, and being a better person with the goal ultimately of having a better world. So I'm going to read this to you. Obviously, it's a translation, and I'm going to try to be clear. You don't have a copy. It's not that profound. I think you will enjoy it. I told you, this is not a very heavy philosophical, mental kind of exercise. This is a to the heart. One of the famous books in Musar is Duties of the Heart, and heart is a big word in Musar. Okay. Inasmuch as we have explained the advantage of the qualities of man, it is only fitting for us to explain their importance and their blame, their goodness and their evil, until there will stretch in front of the intelligent person a straight path, and he will reach the courtyard of the king, if his soul will choose good qualities with all its might. For inasmuch as a man has choice, he may throw aside the husk and take the fine flour. How can this be? There's a certain type, and forgive me, ladies. Don't shoot the messenger. Does say ma'am. There's a certain type of man that is a man of wrath, that is always angry. And then there is a man who is calm and never gets angry at all. And if he does get angry, it's a very little anger and occurs once in many years. And there's a man that's exceedingly proud of heart, and there's another man who's exceedingly humble. And there's a man who lusts and his soul is never satisfied with following his desire. And there's another man, very pure of heart, who does not desire even the few things that the body needs. Okay, we haven't gotten very far in this, but you get the flavor, you get the tone. Do you relate at some level? You know any of these people? They're not us. Okay. And there is a man who, with so many desires that his soul would not be satisfied with all the money in the world, like the manner that is spoken, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver. Okay. Taking this, I want to jump back to the Aseret Dibrot for a second. It's not a big stretch if you spend some time on it, that there is somewhere in the Torah you're going to find a commandment that these midot speak to. There is definitely a link. They're not independent of each other. It might take a little bit of thinking, not a whole lot of thinking. So in terms, I jump with this one about loving silver. For me, this is idolatry. Okay, you should not have idols.
We're also not coveting.
Okay, coveting, okay, absolutely, absolutely. If we take 613 plus 10 more, we got 713. We've knocked 2 off of the list already. Okay. But some of them actually, to be fair, repeat, and some of them, as we know, are not relevant today or applicable today. And there is, excuse me. And there's one whose desire is so limited that everything is enough for him, even the smallest quantity, and he does not seek to obtain all his needs. And there are times when he afflicts himself with hunger and gathers each morsel. He does not eat a penny's worth that belongs to him, except in great anguish. And there are times when he throws away his money with his own hands knowingly. The two opposites. And in this vein, there are the rest of the characteristics. For example, one glad, one sorrowful, one miserly, one liberal, one cruel, one merciful, one tender of heart, one brave of soul, and all similar traits. And of all these characteristics, there are some which a man has from the moment of his creation according to his physical nature. And there are also characteristics with the nature of his particular man is more prepared and more ready to receive quickly in the future than other characteristics. And there are those qualities that do not belong to a man from the beginning of his creation, but he learns from others or returns them himself returns to them himself according to an inclination that occurs to him. So what we got here is nature versus nurture. Excuse me, readjust here a little bit. Okay. Does anyone want to comment so far?
Nelson.
No, okay, Nelson's not lit up though.
Yeah,
Hands up.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, the hand.
Oh,
Okay.
muted Nelson.
Okay, Nelson, talk, please. Love to hear from you.
Well, I was curious. You said Yitro was the first management consultant. Is the Ten Commandments the first handout? Why does it have to be a handout? Why can't it just be something to memorize?
Okay, my handout is not about the 10 Commandments because the 10 Commandments are omnipresent and we can find them easily. My handout is specifically for people. I just feel it's important for people to know that these are the different versions. There are 3 or 4 versions on there from the different religions. This was an aside, a learning thing. I'm not trying to teach you today the Catholic Church's 10 Commandments, but I did
No,
want
but for God, it had to be a handout. Why?
Oh, okay. I thought you were, okay. I identified with, thought I did something wrong. Okay. How is it a handout? I mean, it's a declaration.
It isn't just words; it's tablets.
Thank you. I forgot about that.
You forgot.
Okay.
They were broke. Good.
And as soon as they were broken, God wanted to make another set.
Right. Okay, you're right. Does anyone want to
Something
comment on that?
concrete. What it is something concrete that you can show to people and pass on. Otherwise, you're passing on words, an oral tradition, and that is like the telephone game. Things can change.
I think it's brilliant. It's absolutely true in human nature then and now, which is the more senses we engage, the more something is going to imprint upon us. Yes.
Yeah, engaging with what you read, I was surprised that they talked about intrinsic from birth sort of attributes, because of course in Judaism, we've always stayed away from the concept of original sin, which Christianity has taken on. It's a negative thing. So I'm surprised that there's, I know it qualified it by based on physical or whatever. But I'm just surprised that the statement was made that there are things that you have from birth. Like that what you might have been saying, the nature side of things.
Well, I'm not saying I'm reading, but yeah,
Well,
I think yes. Yeah, I think this is not theological and original sin. I'm gonna go with it's a little bit more in the theological pile. And it's a good point and it makes me think and I love it. And that's why I took the jump to something different, hopefully.
Mhm.
But having said that, I think that this is a recognition that even way back then, people understood that all of us are not created as a blank slate. We come with certain predilections. You know, we are each unique. But Tselem Elohim, but still unique. We are not clones of each other until our experience. So maybe they didn't quite have nature versus nurture, but they kind of got it and they recognize it. This is actually pretty profound. It's quite humane. It's quite real. And I think it's really attainable for people 1,000 or 1,200 years later from the original source. It still speaks to us. Anything else? Yes.
I was reading just this morning that if you practice midot and musar, and then you will become more, you'll be at a spiritual level, and then you will be living the 10 Commandments before they were even given as 10 Commandments. For example, Abraham and our other patriarchs and probably matriarchs as well, were living according to the 10 Commandments because they were at such a high spiritual level. So what you're saying, according to that interpretation, goes perfectly with the 10 Commandments. Because how do you explain that Abraham was already practicing? He came to the conclusion of one God, Hashem. So did Yitro. Although I wouldn't call
Okay,
him.
well, I can't
compare
explain.
him to Abraham, but that was according to Rabbi Twersky and
Okay.
our Torah
He's a
that,
great source.
that he gave, and
Let's,
it connects them very well.
we can find many things like that. Sheila.
Well, basically how I see Musar, and especially considering the historical setting, the late Middle Ages, oh, I shouldn't call it that way. What is it? The 14th, 15th, 16th century and later when it started, is that you have people who study and can understand the text. And then there are people who just need the feeling. It's like the difference between
Exactly.
Hasid and Mitnaged. The Mitnaged
Right.
is someone
Okay, but
who's
I don't want to go
flexible.
there today. Right, I
Okay,
understand.
but that's where
But
Musar comes
I
in.
think that's fair. I think that's
You don't
fair.
have to
And
know
I'm going to
anything.
take it a different way. I'm going to suggest to you that if you're a practicer of Musar, at least the way it's understood today, you have some text. I'm giving you a little flavor now. I'm not even saying you need to read a whole lot more because you're going to get the idea today. But it is a practice. In other words, we've got to take it out of the book and put it into our hearts. That's the goal with Musar. And people who are not into the book at all sometimes relate or often relate through the practice, the doing it part. So I'm trying to, one of my revered teachers, Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Byron Sherwin, who had smicha from Heschel, Rabbi Heschel, made a comment on the next paragraph I'm going to read you, and I'm going to see if you think the same thing. Didn't occur to me. Okay. There is a certain trait that one must use in many places, and there is a trait which should only be used a little. All of this is like one preparing a dish for which he needs vegetables, meat, water, salt, and pepper. Now, all of these ingredients he must take from each one a certain measure. From this ingredient a little, and from this ingredient much. If he puts in too little meat, the dish will be meager. And if he puts in too much salt, the dish cannot be eaten because it's too salty. And thus it is with all our traits. If he puts in too little of what he requires much, and puts in too much of what he requires little, then the food will be spoiled. And the expert is the one who can take of every ingredient the proper measure. Then the food will be pleasant and sweet to those who eat it. In a similar manner are the qualities of a man. There are qualities of which he ought to take much, for example, modesty and their life. And there are qualities of which he must take only a little, for example, pride and cruelty. Therefore, when a man weighs his, I would argue with the translation cruelty, that's not what the intent is, but I don't have it, the text in front of me in Hebrew. Therefore, when a man weighs his qualities in the balance of the scales, let him take from every quality its proper measure. He should not take less and he should not add. In this way, he will reach the ultimate goodness. Does anybody have a reaction to this analogy? Yes.
So to perhaps strain the analogy a little bit, I'll offer two things. One is that some expert chefs will understand these measurements with their fingers or pouring slightly. And others of us, to get anywhere close to the same result, need measuring cups and really detailed instructions. So maybe it's a question of practice, maybe it's a question of talent, maybe it's a question of both. And then the other thing that occurs to me is that if we want to strain the analogy even a little bit further, one says a little more pepper and it would taste so much better. Another says, oh, it's too peppery for me. So the actual balance may not be so clear.
Or maybe.
I think,
Sorry.
I like the analogy, and what impresses me here is that I think most human beings have the tendency to judge others. And if we talk in Judaism about that we should judge favorably, we could look at some of these things, look at an aspect of something, someone who irritates us, but look for some of the other qualities and judge them more on that which we see as positive. So I think human judgment, and I'm sure it happens in shuls and elsewhere, where human beings interact with other human beings, there's this tendency to judge others.
Beautiful.
And we don't know their backgrounds. We don't know what sorrows they're going around with. We don't know why they ignore us. Lots of thoughts. I like
I
that
love it, yeah.
analogy as I've been called a foodie by somebody. So I
Well,
love that.
Okay, great. Does anything, I'll take one more comment and we'll move on. Yes, please.
I was thinking that maybe you could summarize that paragraph by saying in all things moderation.
I think you can summarize Musar that way.
So it's Aristotelian.
There, right. Okay, so Rabbi Dr. Sherwin said two things. He said, maybe this was actually written by a woman, or maybe whoever wrote it, I hate to be sexist, but his wife was a great cook. But there's some experience in here with positivity in food and not just fast food, like quality prepared kind of food. We're almost done, guys, and I'm glad you're following it. I'm sorry you don't have it in front of you, but this is hopefully working. Are we okay?
Yeah.
Okay. You should know and you should understand that if he whose nature inclines him towards an evil quality, or one who is accustomed to an evil quality, does not take it to heart to repent of it, but always permits it to grow stronger, then this will bring him to a state where he will reject and loathe good qualities. You got to be open to this. You know, if you're a skeptic and if that is your nature, in other words, this isn't a surefire thing. There has to be some degree of acceptance that a self-fulfilling prophecy that this is going to work. I believe this can work. So I'm going to do my best to make it work, as opposed to this is a bunch of garbage. You know, I'm not even going to try. It's going to bring him, there are people who are going to reject this. And bah humbug type people. And there's a recognition in this text that although theoretically it's for all of us and it's attainable to anyone who wishes it, you're always going to have bah humbug type people. And just as much pain and anguish and troubles are the sicknesses of the body, so are most of the evil traits and sicknesses of the soul. And just as the sickness of the body tastes the bitter as sweet, and the sweet as bitter, there is among those, excuse me, among those who are ill, one that longs for food that is not good for him and hates good food. And all of this depends upon the extent of his illness. So do people whose souls are sick, long for and love evil traits, and they hate the good path or are too lazy to walk it. And it's very hard for them according to the extent of their sickness. Maybe the words are a little bit heavy, but what's the message here?
It's hard to do the right thing for ourselves.
with this, I'm gonna just take a little bit of exception. You're right, but I'm not sure. To me, if you got that out of this particular reading, then that's perfect. But for me, this is basically saying that there are always gonna be some bad people.
Mhm.
There's also a variety of people. People are not the same. And it's precisely because everybody has different opinions that the world is the way it is. I mean, for better or worse.
I think it also speaks to, two other things. One of them only incidental that I'll throw in for fun.
Sure.
But the first more important one might be that it isn't necessarily easy, and for some people, either because of their traits or the way they don't address them that much harder, kind of reminds me of Pharaoh when we talk about hardening his own heart before God hardens his heart.
Love it.
And then the incidental comment is that we now see from what you read that clarity of communication in English does depend on proper punctuation.
So let me show you. This is one I downloaded from Safari, but have it with me. Okay, this is my copy from when I was in grad school. All right, well scribbled. And I love this translation. This one isn't a bad translation, but this one is warmer to me. I can't, the translation is Rabbi Shraga Silverstein. It is a Feldheim Publishing. It is absolutely available as a book, but I couldn't download a snippet. And in the sources for Safaria, they have 6 versions of the Path of the Righteous, this book, or Tzakim, that you can choose from. And so I took the most readable, it's a Katav one. That's what we're looking at. But I couldn't get this one, so I'm reading you a different one. I don't know if anybody cares or if I have the time, but some of the choices of words in there speak to me better. I don't want to downplay this one. This one is totally fine, but translations do matter. I used to be a linguist, so I'm into the precise words are not exactly, it's not one for one translation. The other thing I thought of with this whole thing, because we're talking here about people who have sickness of soul, sickness of body, or sickness of mind and sickness of body. So I mentioned to you that one of the people that's oft quoted in terms of Musar, and he's oft quoted in terms of everything, including medical texts, was the Rambam. So maybe this concept, came maybe because of the health part of it, came from him. So that's the little introduction to, now you have a flavor for the Musar, and that's the academic basic. But now we got to go a little bit to the how-to. And I mentioned at the beginning, I asked if any of you had been exposed to the Musar Institute. Norm and I don't know if Norm remembers, you remember? Temple Mount Sinai, Rabbi Alan,
You have to build.
the question. Okay, he's not a rabbi. His name is Alan Marinas. Alan Marinas started the Musar Institute probably maybe 2005, 2010, something. Lives in Canada. It's grown, and he's now the founder. He's not the only, he was a one-act show for a long time. But the Musar Institute materials, people can take courses online, people can go to workshops and such throughout North America. The materials are, I think, of great value. And I'm gonna tell you, full disclosure, these are mostly his words, not mine. Okay, and understanding this.
I do remember.
You do remember, thank you. Okay, so these are my words, but then I'll tell you when I'm quoting from Alan, okay? Again, it's called the Musar Institute. I'm not trying to tell you to sign up, but a lot of people know about it. I guess it's the Jewish version of going to Thailand and finding a spiritual something or other, or that kind of thing. And I have to say that it wouldn't be unusual it's not unusual for people who have searched for this spirituality throughout many Eastern practices and found it perhaps there, then coming home and saying it was here all the time in front of me. But it's certainly not well known. It's certainly not mainstream except in certain areas, probably more in the western part of the United States than here. I don't know. Anyway, so these are my words that I wrote a long time ago. So the accounting of the soul, the Cheshbon HaNefesh, is simple to describe, but it's surprisingly challenging to practice. it has to be done enough for you to secure a habit. It has to be done just like brushing your teeth before you go to bed. The concept is usually today something called journaling. Another word you've heard a lot. But it can be elusive to do Musar journaling because you can forget to journal. You can be too tired to journal. You can not have time to journal. Or you can rationalize it, I don't do it tonight, I've done it enough this week. So really it takes discipline to pick up the pen or the tablet or whatever you're gonna use to make those entries. But Musar journaling basically asks you to keep something near your bed and do it night after night after night, except on Shabbat. Another challenge is that things happen and then get forgotten. And when it comes time to journal, they just are in your memory to be retrieved. And Ellen Marinas mentions that he was practicing the midah of generosity. And he responded, I didn't do anything generous today. And then he woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know why, but he did that. I don't know if anybody wakes up in the middle of the night. I certainly never do. Anyway, and he said, you know what? I had a telephone solicitor this morning and I donated $90 to something or other. I forgot to write that in my journal. Okay, so there's all of these human kinds of things, but again, it's just very relatable. So it's choosing some of his words. He says that accounting, cheshbon hanefesh, accounting for the soul, is a very effective process for creating self-awareness. And what we write to the conscious reveals to the conscious mind what lurks in our unconscious that directs us to think, act, and speak in the habitual ways we do. These influences are by definition hidden from us. And so no matter how hard we peer directly into our inner selves, we won't uncover anything of what lurks below the surface. That is, and talking about the generic, in other words, I'm going to say to each one of you, sit here right now and think about how you are in terms of patient. Are you patient or impatient? Think about it. And what he's saying is that's not good enough. You'll get a very general thing, but not enough to repair your soul and make it an inner trait that is you to the point of being whole and finding shlemut. Because the contents of our unconscious are perfectly reflected in the patterns of our deeds. That's what we're focusing on. Certain images return night after night and the patterns become unmistakable. We need this truth about ourselves to guide our steps. Okay, for example, you could write in your journal your intention to practice being generous. And to focus on this practice even more, you could write, what kinds of generosity are there? He says, I listed 6 different kinds of generosity that I intend to practice 6 days of the week, excluding Shabbat. And when I read that, I thought you certainly can be generous looking at his definitions on Shabbat. So I disagree, respectfully disagree. These are days 1 through 6. Be generous with money, be generous with food, be generous with time, with possessions, with empathy. Would we have thought about that as a generosity thing?
Yeah.
He suggests that.
Yes.
Be generous with words. Then every evening that week, I got out my journal and recorded how I had done in practicing that way I set for myself. The prototype for this kind of stock taking is none other than God, the guy in the sky. Because after each day of creation, God looked back at the day and evaluated it, and he saw that it was good. Both. Since one of the guiding principles of Musar is to practice walking in his way, the his with a capital H, in other words, to learn from and try to emulate the divine, so we too are to look back at our actions and evaluate them, just like God did. Okay, so that means the cheshbon hanefesh. To illustrate from the example of generosity practice that I mentioned, I recorded in my journal at the end of day 1 that I had indeed stretched myself to be more generous with money than was my norm. I had put more than usual into the collection box at shul that morning. I had reached into my wallet to give money to an indigent person. And most telling of all, when I settled up the account of it at a restaurant and I started to enter the amount of the tip into the credit card terminal, I caught myself putting in less than generous amount, erased that and started again with a higher digit. But I had nothing like that to record on the day that I had set myself to be generous with food. That day I failed to fulfill my intentions I fed no one. I had had a plan. I was going to buy a sandwich and a drink and give those items to the first homeless person I met, but I didn't do it. I got caught up in my day and simply did nothing in the direction I intended. That went into my journal too. I had a different report on the day when I said to be generous with my possessions. I had a plan for that day too. I was going to go through some closets, find some clothes and other items I didn't use anymore, and donate these things to a thrift store. And if you could flip around, open my journal and see that entry I wrote that evening, you would have seen written there that I did that very thing. At the end of the 7-day practice, do a personal stock taking of your experience. What happened? How did you feel at the end of the week? In contrast to how you would ordinarily feel about this midah, about this trait in your heart. Are you thinking about your generosity differently on Shabbat, on Saturday, the 7th day, than you were on previous Sunday when you started this particular exercise? Did any experiences bring to mind your level of purity of the soul or impurity of the soul?
Sounds like,
Yes, please.
like an accounting system.
That's what word cheshbon means.
This is an
That's the
accounting,
word.
it seems too systematic almost, too stiff, it doesn't seem real. I mean, people that study Torah and perform mitzvot all the time, mitzvahs all the time. I mean, I think that it's at a certain point in your life, like I think, and you mentioned this earlier, it has to become internalized so that you just do it. You just do it. You don't have to keep track or write it down or have a system where you're accounting for it, everything. That's enough to make you crazy.
Well, his purpose and many people.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, the
Well, I'm
whole
gonna take-
concept of mitzvahs, I mean, this is Judaism. That's why we study Torah. We grow, we develop, we improve.
Okay, Ivan, if I tell you, so that there's a mitzvah tzedakah, giving tzedakah. And the answer is, yeah, I give tzedakah. What he is suggesting, or what Musar is suggesting, is that might not be to the level that you can or you should. Is that you're making your own, this is an exercise to increase your awareness, to become self-aware. I'm not, different strokes for different folks, and you don't absolutely have to do this in this way, but the idea of self-reflection is extremely, actually in itself, a mitzvah. To check on yourself. This is what, this whole concept of the month of Elul before the Yamim Noraim. Yes, please, Nina.
You know what I find missing, at least in just our discussion today? Role models, because I really believe in the ripple effect, especially with Musar. Because many times, I'm sure all of us our actions might be because of something someone did as a role model, whatever, and it inspires you to do the mitzvah or whatever it is.
You're supposed to become the role model.
So, but it is a ripple effect, the more good we do and the more mitzvot, it just carries on. But I don't know, maybe it is.
Okay, no, I think
Is it part of?
first of all, the answer is yes to all of this, because as I mentioned, the text for this is life. And what Ivan said, I don't want to think that I'm putting it down. I'm thinking that I can understand that for some people, there's a different way to evaluate yourself than doing a mechanized ritual list. For many people, having a routine, it makes it real, and that works. That doesn't mean it's 100%, but the concept of taking stock of yourself in a detailed way is actually a commandment. If you're supposed to do that. Yes.
Getting back to the cooking analogy.
Oh, my goodness.
Pepper specifically, in my extension of the analogy. I think that part of what's happening here is you could say there's a range of the amount of pepper you could add to the dish, that we could disagree about whether it's a good amount or a bad amount, but it's a range that's quote acceptable. And maybe there's a place where there's so little pepper, it's not enough, and so much that only a handful of people would. But what I think the value maybe of this journaling mechanism, and again, it's not, Ivan, to disagree with you entirely, but I would suggest it's possible that somebody could say, I'm generous, and maybe they give a little bit once a year. And somebody else would say, that's not generous. But what this process could do for either one of those two people, even though you can't necessarily ultimately quantify what's enough generosity, as it could vary, how much pepper. But it's a way of concretizing it. It's, for example, one of the things I've been working on since this last Yom Kippur is patience. Because sometimes I feel I get impatient. So what I'm doing in part is I say to myself, when I feel like I'm becoming impatient, I say in my head, sablanut, sablanut, sablanut. And I step back a little bit and I think about it. If I were writing it down every night, I might think about it more.
I wouldn't have the patience to write it down.
Would he? That's fair. See, that's a different. But having said that, I'm just, what this suggestion is there's more than one way to be patient. Patience is not maybe the first thing that we jump to. Same thing with money and in the examples with generosity, we understandably jump to money, but he's talking about generosity of words. I mean, would we even evaluate that? Does that being, in other words, whatever text or whatever exercise helps you become broader in your understanding of the meaning of the word is totally kosher, proper in Musar, yes.
I imagine it's probably somewhere within the writing is implied. What I'm not seeing though is that the strength of each midah varies at times according to the context. In other words, you can have patience, fine, but there are times when you shouldn't be as patient, and it's.
And you're 100%.
I'm just not seeing that.
Okay, you're 100%. First of all, this is not a full course in
Yeah.
in Musar, and you're 100%. One of the things that I've come across is that they talk about a scale, and they say your goal should be 5.5, slightly over to the positive side, but you've got to be human, so you're not going to be perfect on the scale of 1 to 10. Let's see, do we have a little bit more time or are we over time?
More time, over time, but go ahead.
We have another half hour until.
So this is my own, systematic versus not. So decades ago, when we were still writing checks, every December, I would sit down and write, 20 checks to charities. Now I feel more generous by doing it throughout the year, more meaningful to me. I don't think about December and the routine about, whatever it was. It's more meaningful to me. I feel more generous by doing it whenever I feel the occasion.
And I'm sorry, I know I'm harping on a thing and this is not a criticism because we need to be generous in the way that we're all thinking about this. But I think that if we go back to what I read before, he gave 6 kinds of generous. So maybe the idea of expanding that term, expanding the word, I'm happy to stay, but I just want to give one other, I have a bunch more, but don't have time. I just wanted to mention in terms of this middle ground, one thing is being arrogant and another thing is being humble. But being arrogant is bad, usually, most of the time, but you can be too humble. You can be way too humble. And one of the things that I love, if I can find it here, is, for example, the trait of humility. The mantra for that trait, according to the Musar Institute, is not more than my space, no less than my place. In addition, the author defines humility as knowing your proper place in the world and acting accordingly. Humility is not, that's anava in Hebrew, not exclusively about getting rid of haughtiness, important as that is. It's recommended a daily affirmation, no more than my place, no less than my space. The second half of that phrase suggests that being too humble isn't being humble at all. The same thing, and I'm not going to read it as I have you mentioned patience, several of you. The idea of being, there's times when it's proper to be impatient, that enough is enough. Enough is enough. So a lot of this is, of course, about being a better person, of course, about concretizing the mitzvot that apply, that come to us in written word, but we need to bring them to our heart, which is a key word. But the other part of this is being real. We are not required by anything in Torah, including Musar, to be angels. Because sometimes an angel can't do what we as humans can and need to do. So it's that middle ground. And I thank you for listening, and I'm here, and I don't mean to shut anyone off, but if anybody feels the urge to get up and leave, I won't be insulted. Did you want to say